I put a spell on you.
Perfect. I love that song anyway.
I do too.
All right, so here we are. This is the Bunny Rabbit's Hole. This is officially episode 1 of season 3.
Da-da-da! Sorry.
So, all right. So, if you haven't been here for the first couple seasons, what we do here at the Bunny Rabbit's Hole is we find a central theme for each and every week, and then we talk about that for a little bit until something inspires us to talk about something completely different. Until one of us decides, you know what, we should probably talk about what we were supposed to be talking about in the first place, because you don't really care about our little anecdote at this moment. Or one of us got sick of listening to the anecdote, and then we're just trying to stop the other one from continuing because
Right.
we're bored.
Yes. And as Jason says, we pick one topic and we research both sides, not just what fits our narrative, but this is for entertainment, so we do include our opinions as well. So if you don't like that and you're easily offended, I really don't care at this point.
No, we've been doing this for a couple seasons now, so we don't really worry about that. But we do want to put out a little tiny disclaimer. Season 2 was a beatdown, emotionally, mentally, and everything. We are going to go back to what we normally do: less current events, more cryptids, more spooky shit, more ghosts, more aliens, more.
More
less,
interesting shit.
less politics, less personal shit, less,
Yes.
less is more.
We all have our demons. We all have our sword to bear.
Yes. So, what are we going to talk about first to start this off if we're going to go back to our roots?
I'm not the one who's so far away. I'm sorry. Or maybe just voodoo? 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 Or voodoo?
Voodoo that you do so well.
I don't know.
All right. We are going to discuss. Now, we've already discussed, because when we researched this, there's so many different little rabbit holes within voodoo that we felt that we would just kind of do a broad general overview of a lot of this stuff. There are certain things that we would talk about that we can make into a whole episode just among themselves. So today we may talk about things that we're going to turn into larger episodes. So if you want to know more about little aspects of what we're doing, either A, you can look it up for yourself, or B, stay tuned and you'll see an episode about it later.
Patience, my child. Patience.
Something neither one of us have.
Right. Yes. And what I find interesting about this, and before we go into the history and everything else, or the definition and all the things that we have to do because we're informing people, but
yes,
most religions you can, and voodoo is a religion.
Yes, it is.
So most religions you can trace it back and pinpoint right where it started. Voodoo, you got a country and that's it. West Africa, they believe the birthplace to be what is now modern day Benin, but they really don't know. Nobody really knows where this started from.
Right.
All we know is West Africa, but we don't have a location or a person who started it. I mean, like Scientology, you got what, Heinlein or whatever his name is, or Hubbard.
LRH Hubbard.
Yeah. L. Ron Hubbard. He created Scientology and all that stuff off of that. Whereas voodoo, we don't know how it started. We just know who practiced it.
Yes. Now, I think most people's introduction to voodoo is hearing about, everybody's like, oh, the voodoo doll. Voodoo dolls and a lot of stuff. It's been in like Scooby-Doo and all a whole bunch of other shit. But so that's normally what a lot of people's first introduction to what voodoo is, and they still understand, other than I can take a pin into a doll that looks like you, stab it, and it's going to harm you. Now, but what is voodoo? We just talked about, we don't know where it started, but what do you think voodoo is?
Voodoo, according to ancient origins, net history, ancient blah blah blah, is a grab bag of cultural elements, personal creeds, and practices, including an elaborate system of folk medical practices. Basically, my analogy and way I sum up what voodoo is it's an amalgamation or a mixture, if you will, for those who don't know that word, of Catholicism, alchemy, and witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
It is, like you said, there's a stigma on it. Everybody thinks it's evil. And the reason they believe it's evil basically comes down to racial prejudice. And we'll get into that later. But, Voodoo was created, we don't know where, we don't know why, but we know what it was used for after its creation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in West Africa, people were getting yanked out of their homes and becoming slaves for a couple centuries.
Yeah. No, we all know about the slave trade and all that, but voodoo was kind of a byproduct of this.
Yeah, it was a coping mechanism, if you will.
Yeah. So when they come over, it was something that they could all rally around, and it was a cultural thing, and it was also something that at the time was so. I mean, even today, I can't really say at the time. Even today, a lot of people really don't understand what voodoo is, and it's like it's sorcery, it's witchcraft, it's it's Satanism. It's occultism. There's so many stigmas that are with this, and we'll go into like the serpent and the rainbow zombie creation type of stuff later, which are all there's so much negative stereotypes and stigmas to voodoo today, and we have the information to look the shit up. So now imagine it's 1720s, and this is the time where they're still actually burning witches alive. Yeah. And these people are doing this shit where they're dripping blood from chickens, and they have these little ritual ceremonies, casting spells. I do that in air quotes, which drives me nuts when people do that, but I just did it.
And you did that for people who might not even be able to see you do it.
Exactly. That plays well on audio.
Yeah. So, now, voodoo was yes, it came from Africa, but it was used mostly in Haiti because there was the French had a lot of slaves in Haiti, and it was in the U.S., but it didn't really get big in the U.S. and you ask, what brought voodoo to the United States? Well, I got an answer for you. The slaves brought it, duh.
We just fucking said that.
Right. But, so, this is what I found interesting. Like, the voodoo practitioners, what they worship is a being called Bandai.
Mm-hmm.
And they believe in a God that is unknowable and uninvolved.
Mm-hmm.
And so they worship spirits that they call Iowa, or I think you had it down with an L instead of an I. I don't know which one's right now.
Oh, right. Yeah, I noticed that too. Well, coincidentally, voodoo means spirit in the Fon language.
Right.
So when you're talking about dealing with spirits in the spirit realm and all that. So I'll let you continue. Sorry. Fun fact.
So we're in Haiti, right? So and yes, it's being practiced in the States at this time, but it's not real big.
Right.
But in Haiti, it was really big because there was a lot of slaves there, and then so many that they had a slave revolt. They had many slave revolts, but in 1730, I believe, in the 1730s, the slave revolt finally won, and they kicked all the French out of Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
So these French people, with their French-speaking slaves, ended up in, and I'll try to say it like you do because you live down there, Nolens. I was close.
Yeah, close, really close.
So they end up in New Orleans, whatever.
Whatever you want to say.
Yep. And this is when it really started taking on. Because now that you have these French-speaking slaves and these, slaves that have already been here starting to intermix, and they're mixing their brands of voodoo. And then in 1865, a law was passed in the U.S. that no religions that were practiced in Africa could be practiced in the U.S. or they couldn't speak any African language in the U.S.
So, okay, I want to touch on that real quick because mainly we'll go into the religious part in a second, but mainly the language part. So the Haitians kicked the French out, yet they still spoke French.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a combination of dialects when they get into southeastern Louisiana around New Orleans and the Chapellat Basin and all this other shit. But in that area, they speak Creole, which isn't necessarily French, but it's not really its own language either. It's this combination of French and then their own words and stuff. It is in fact, I guess you'd have to say it's their own language.
Right.
But,
dialect.
Yeah. But the fact that they dislike the French so much that they forced them off the island, Haiti, that is, no, Louisiana is not an island, but they forced them out of the island, yet they still kept the language.
Right.
I find interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Now,
yeah,
I don't know. It's probably just a matter of just convenience because, well, all of a sudden we kick England out of the United States. We didn't start speaking something else. We kept speaking English.
Right.
Well, and then it turned into whatever the fuck we speak today.
Yeah, who knows what it is.
Smiley faces and clicks.
Yeah, we speak in emojis now.
Yeah.
That's our new dialect. But it's interesting because I'm gonna go back to that law that was passed.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, they passed this law saying you couldn't worship. You couldn't. It's also that any slaves that were brought in had to be converted to Christianity within 8 days of landing in the U.S. That was also part of that law.
8 days.
Yep.
So it's like right there is like central booking. It's processing.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, how do you convert somebody in 8 days when they don't really speak the words that you're trying to tell them? They're just they fucking speak. They fucking love Jesus now. Oh, he's on the cross.
Well, I'm sure they use other slaves to do that.
I'm sure, yeah. And if those slaves didn't do it, they were beaten
or killed.
So, right.
But so they passed this law, and you don't have to be like a rocket science to figure out to know why they passed it. They didn't want the religion because it was spooky to them, and they didn't want them speaking anything but English because they could be practicing their religion if they're talking their own language. We wouldn't know.
And if they're not, if they're not speaking the language, that they don't understand what they're saying, and they could start a revolution. Right,
like they did in Haiti.
Haiti.
But so now, what these slaves did, and everybody looks down on slaves back then, and everybody thinks slaves are stupid. They're actually pretty ingenious people. Unfortunately, yes, they were captured and they were forced into slavery and things like that. But so what they did is they took Catholicism and mixed voodoo with it.
Right.
And that's how they got away with continuing to practice it. And they would do that because, if you really look at Catholics, they don't worship God. They worship saints and angels and everybody but.
Right. Catholicism is coming from that world as a child. Catholicism is a weird thing where the saints mean almost as much as Jesus does, because Jesus may be the Son of God, but he's not really. He's only part of three that you kind of look at. And then the saints are kind of like on this equal playing field. And then the Bible is just good stories, so a lot of other Christians, and I'm using those air quotes again, because most of them don't follow their own rules, are, when they force a book that's full of hypocrisy and contradiction, when you say that that's the word of God, you have to, blindly use blind faith to think about. I don't know where the fuck I'm going with that, but
yeah.
I kind of lost my train of thought there. But so it was really, I guess where I was getting a roundabout way I'm trying to get to, it was really easy for the slaves to find loopholes in a book that's full of contradiction.
Yeah, book basically full of loopholes.
Yes, and they could change certain little things
Yes.
to I like the Saint Peter to
Yes.
Papa Legba,
The gatekeeper of the
the
spirit world.
gatekeeper of the spirit world.
Or
So it
like
was
Saint
really,
Patrick was Dambala, also the snake eye.
yeah. So it was really easy for them to interject their own beliefs, their own belief system, and put them in here. It's kind of like we have modern day versions. Let's say modern day within the last 50 years. They do this in cinema all the time. You have a young child who's an orphan living with his aunt and uncle, who a mysterious man shows up and tells him, "No, you're special. You have powers."
Mm-hmm.
Am I talking about Harry Potter? No, I'm talking about Luke Skywalker, motherfucker. Come on.
Right.
So, oh wait, no, I'm talking about I'm talking about Maze Runner. I'm talking about you know, I'm talking about Percy Jackson. I'm talking about they're all the
Ready
same.
Player One.
Yeah, they're all the same story, and it's just you interject your pieces and parts throughout it. They've done it for centuries with Once Upon a Time. There's actually a structure to create your own Once Upon a Time. It's just a 7-step process, but so you can take these stories and interject your own people in them. And when everybody starts associating, oh, we're going to say St. Peter now instead of Papa Legba,
Right.
we all know who we mean. So we can actually practice openly our religion just using your verbiage.
Right. And it's actually pretty ingenious.
It was very ingenious. And people look down upon prisoners too. But look at some of the shit that these guys create
Yeah.
inside prison. I mean, they'll use every little bit of it, like even a ramen noodle wrapper. They figure out ways to do this, use each and every piece of it. They're very resourceful. When you get into desperation like that, then you become very resourceful to live. And that's kind of what these slaves did. And they was like, well, we want to keep true to who we are, and you want us to
Right.
believe this nonsense. We're just going to turn your nonsense into something that we can relate to, and there you go.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things. I mean, you go back to like Catholicism and stuff like that. I mean, and you can see if you put them side by side, you can really see how the rituals line up and everything else. Because let's be realistic, there's a ton of rituals in Catholic religion.
It is a ritual. Every mass is a ritual. You stand up a certain time, you sit down a certain thing. Well, if you think about witchcraft, it's like you have to add ingredients at a certain time. You have to cast a spell at a certain time of the year. You have, there's rituals involved with both. So there's no way that you can say the idea of transforming this little chunk of bread into the actual embodiment of Christ and turning this wine into blood. It's a ritual that you have to do that. It's a spell. There's nothing different between the two.
No. And I think the only difference between the two, well, not the only difference, there's tons of differences, but like we talked about Catholic worship, everybody but God.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would actually add, from a lot of Catholic, from my upbringing and stuff, that Jesus's mom is up higher than Jesus in their religion.
It's especially when you start getting into like the Latin American countries.
Mm-hmm.
That Lady Madonna.
They have more of a matriarchal society though too.
Yeah, that Lady Madonna is a very, very powerful figure. I mean, very, very strong, manly men in Mexico have huge tattoos of her on their backs and chests.
Right. So I mean, so they took that stuff and they ran with it, and then we got some really cool movies like Angel Heart. Which,
yes.
If you haven't seen that, go out and check that out. Great, Mickey Rourke and Robert De Niro and Lisa Bonet.
The first 8 minutes of that movie are just phenomenal.
Yep.
The whole devil scene at the beginning.
Yeah, check that movie out. That is a great movie. But
and Serpent and the Rainbow, which is another great movie.
Right. So like we said, they mixed it. They mixed. Basically, they took their rituals and intermixed them with Catholic rituals. The big difference also is that they were more about nature, spirits, and ancestry instead of um, basically bowing down to serving and basically spend your life serving or preparing to die, because that's what Catholics do.
Yeah. Yeah. So voodoo, like you said, they look at their ancestors and they consult them for guidance and protection.
Right. Yeah, like their core belief is that one God does not interfere in daily lives, but that the spirits do. And you can connect to these spirits through rituals like music, dance, snakes, and chanting. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of so-called Christian religions that use snakes and shit like that too.
Oh yeah, there's a whole little I'm gonna call them a cult because that's what they are. They
Yeah,
actually bring deadly venomous snakes into their little church, and if you get bit, it's God's will.
right. And
But going
like,
back to going back to what you said about so yes, voodoo practitioners believe in the existence of one supreme God. That it's a very abstract, omnipotent, yet unknowable force. Okay,
right,
so there's God, but God can't be bothered with everything else. So below God are the spirits and Loa, or spirits or Loa. They rule over the world's affairs in the matters of. I'm reading this verbatim here. It's
yeah,
so I don't get them all wrong. That for when they're looking for guidance in family, love, happiness, justice, health, net wealth, work, or harvest or hunt.
yeah,
Those are generally the things that they look for guidance or help with.
right. And now here's a way you can kind of tie voodoo in with other religions. So when voodoo got into Louisiana, you started getting what they call voodoo queens and voodoo kings.
Hmm.
And however, like, well, let's go. Marie Laveau, she was the most famous voodoo queen. If you go on YouTube, type in voodoo, you're gonna see 12,000 videos on Marie Laveau.
Right.
And we'll probably do an episode of her and Dr. John together, because there's just too much on her. But she was a legendary practitioner, and she is the most famous queen. But back in that time frame, people, the whoever the queens and kings of voodoo, much like the higher ups in other religions, would have positions of political power and religious power in New Orleans at the time.
Hmm.
So, however high up you were in voodoo was how high up you were in a position of power. And like Marie Laveau lived to be 87. She died in 1881. 1881, she lived to be 87 years old.
Which is unheard of.
Yeah, average lifespan at the time, I've got to say, like probably 40 years.
Yeah.
She doubles that. Could be voodoo. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know if I believe in voodoo. I don't know if I disbelieve in voodoo at this point. I don't know enough about it.
Oh, just like we've said this about. I mean, and we're talking a lot about religion because obviously voodoo is a religion, and we're making fun of Catholics because I always quote George Carlin when I said I was Catholic until the age of reason, and
Right.
then no longer. But the whether you believe in it or not, it's one of those things that we've talked about in other episodes about like manifestation and stuff. It's really up to you if you believe it's important. If you believe in it's, I there's and I do respect religions in this aspect, or people who are religious, is the word faith. Okay, they believe that there's a spirit, a man, a woman, or Lilith sitting on a throne in a cloud, or under the earth, casting weaving roots or whatever the fuck's going on. Yeah, pulling the puppet master somewhere, pulling the strings on our entire existence. Now they have blind faith to believe in that wholeheartedly. Okay, now they have proof? Absolutely not, because there's no tangible proof. Now
Mm.
I have blind faith in science. Do I understand it? No, but I read a lot of smart people who can explain it to me.
Right.
So that's where I have faith. I have faith in things that I can't prove, and in a certain respect, they do too. Whether I think they're stupid for believing that is neither here nor there.
Well, and the same thing, they turn around and say, "Well, you're stupid. How do you know that that scientist didn't just work the facts just to make you believe it?" Because that's always their defense.
Yeah, and you know, and that's kind of. I'm glad you brought that up because that's really the biggest issue in this whole part is I can't prove or disprove that they're right or wrong, and I can't disprove that there is no God if I can't honestly go to, Asgard or any of the spectral realms to see what I've never met one. Okay, I've never
Well,
met a God.
let's take it back to Galileo. You know,
Hmm.
here's a man who discovered who he wasn't his discovery, it was somebody else's. It was Copernicus' discovery that he elaborated on, which was that the Earth was not the center of the universe. The sun was the center of the universe. And everything revolved around that. And
Right.
he was ostracized for it because, he looked through a telescope and saw that the moon wasn't a perfect heavenly shape. It
Yeah.
had craters. He saw these things. So he was forced to recant or be burned at the stake
Hmm.
for hearsay.
Yes.
You know, this is the power of religions through this time period.
Okay. And now it comes. I get and I believe and I respect a person's right to believe that there's a God, but when you start enacting and pushing your will of that God on others is where I draw. That's where there's the line drawn.
Right.
The fact that we're basing policy on something that can't be proven or disproven, basically we're, you know, it's a Hansel and Gretel thing. It's like Hansel and Gretel didn't actually exist, but should we go out and chop down forests so that we're not going to have witches?
Right. Right. And
That the
there was
thought of
like,
stupid is what some of these. The sun's got to be the center of the universe. Well, you know what? We're not even in the center of our galaxy. There's a
right.
big ass black hole there. We're like
Yeah.
2/3 out of a spiral arm in our own galaxy. Okay, we're not even close to the center of the universe, and you know what? And our galaxy is not even close to the center of the universe either.
Right. And another similarity between voodoo, which I'm sure they probably took from Catholicism, or some other pagans that got ripped off.
Right?
Saint John's Eve. It's an annual summer solstice. You like that smooth segue
I
transition
did.
back and
That was really. That was a good way of
so
shutting me the fuck up.
it was an annual summer solstice celebration, and Marie Laveau actually started this holiday in the 1830s.
Hmm.
And it's basically it involves a public party and a head washing ritual. But I mean, like the Mexicans in Mexico have their Day of the Dead,
Yeah.
stuff like that. Which
Devote.
yeah, but you get to see all the candy skulls or skull, whatever you call them, and all the
Candy. You get to see Coco in real life.
right. But so I mean, every religion has like their big annual celebration.
Yes.
Unlike like the Sikhs, they have a bunch of them, like birthdays. Anything family related is a huge holiday for the Sikhs.
Right.
And I've met some Sikhs. They're really good people.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a lot about their culture through them, and I thought it was just fascinating. Like, my son moved home after being out on his own for like 4 years, and he couldn't wait to get out of my house. As he said, get the fuck out of my dad's house. And our Sikh friends were like, I just don't understand that. Our families always just stay together. You talk about it takes a village to raise a kid. I mean, their family structure in their home is a village.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's interesting just the difference in cultures and just sit down. And that's why I implore any of our listeners to do. If there's something that from some culture you don't understand, make friends with somebody in that culture and learn it. And learn it from the source, not from a book, not from TV, not from YouTube, not from the internet. Go learn it from somebody who lives it.
Right.
That will give you a better understanding of it and possibly some empathy.
And if you're learning it from somebody who's making fun of it, that's probably not your best.
Don't learn Christianity and Catholicism from us.
No, absolutely not.
If that's where you want to go, hey, more power to you. I implore you, go for it. but don't learn it from us because we're just gonna tear it down the entire time.
And yes, exactly. So back to voodoo.
Right. Right. Yeah. So, like I said, they had that holiday, and you know, as we said earlier, it is still being practiced in the U.S. and like they have this place in New Orleans called the Congo Square,
Mm-hmm.
and this is where all the Africans would get together and stuff like that. And it was, where was it located at? In some park. I have it in my notes somewhere, and I'm not finding it.
I mean, it's
Uh,
the voodoo spiritual temple across the road from the
nope.
Congo Square.
Yeah, yeah, it's across the road from that because they built it. That's the only voodoo temple too. That's not.
Yes.
Anyways, it was in some park in some quarter of Louisiana. It's called Congo Square. I still can't believe I can't find it in my notes. It's weird. But yeah, but yeah, and today like there's one voodoo temple in existence, and that is in Louisiana, in New Orleans, and it's the Voodoo Spiritual Temple because maybe voodoo people lack creativity when it comes to naming things. I don't know.
Right.
That's
And
pretty fucking basic, but
and it's probably one of those things where, it's like, yeah, we can call it like Laveau Square, or the Temple de Laveau, or something along those, anything else. But
right,
at a certain part, they were just like, fuck it, they're just gonna call it the Voodoo Temple anyways. Let's just call it that. So then
right,
it's not an insult.
yeah. So yeah, so that's where you got, and I'll let Jason take you into the zombies.
Okay.
Zombie, zombie. Arr, arr.
Okay, so recently, and I say recently, like within the last 2 decades or so, there's been this huge upswing in the classic movie character, the zombie.
Mm.
You have shows like The Walking Dead that come out, all the the remakes of Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead.
Hi, zombie.
Yeah, it just tons and tons of zombie movies. Max Brooks wrote the book World War Z, and then the Zombie Apocalypse Guide, and so zombies have
Hey,
become really.
I gotta go side quest. World War Z was the first zombie movie I found scary because that's the first zombies I ever saw run.
Yes.
Because all these other zombie movies, I'm like, get in a fucking car and drive away. Run
Right.
to the car, you'll get there with plenty of time. They're not moving fast. They're like, yep, we're out here, we're walking. No shit, I just lost a limb.
Right.
So I'll just keep coming. I'll just kind of roll towards you.
Now, I will say this about zombie movies, though. World War Z was the first one that I I've always wanted to see. You hear in, say, like Dawn of the Dead, you hear radio broadcasts of what's happening in other places.
Mm-hmm.
So you always had this imagination, like, what the fuck is going on there? And then World War Z, you see the carnage in so many different cities, like the pile that's building up like ants in Jerusalem while they're trying to get over the wall. There's all that type of stuff, which was really fucking fascinating. But it does the exact same thing that every other zombie movie does. It starts on a global scale and ends up man fighting zombie alone in one room.
Yeah.
Even Night of the Living Dead, they managed to get out of the cemetery, into the farmhouse, to the second floor, into the attic. Return of the Living Dead, same thing. She ends up in the house,
Yep.
up in the stairs, into the attic. World War Z, it starts on a global scale, and he ends up in a medical lab on the other side of a door. From I Am Legend, same thing. He ends up in his lab on the other side of a piece of glass.
Right.
They always get really myopic at the end, and that's what's always driven me nuts about
Hmm.
zombie movies.
So, how do zombies tie into voodoo, Jason?
Okay, so uh, around 1810, when there was a historian named Robert Southey mentioned in his book The History of Brazil, he mentioned the word zombie with no e in the end, just zombi.
How dare he?
Yeah, uh, but this wasn't actually brainless, decaying mass. This was somebody who wasn't a it wasn't a creature, it's a victim.
Okay.
Now, the zombie practice is actually something that it's actually evolved from a practice by a Haitian, uh, a dark Haitian, or not dark Haitian, sorry, that was wrong. A dark voodoo practice of poisoning somebody and like trapping their soul. And then you become under the control, under the command of whoever holds the totem, which holds your soul. Now,
And to kind of explain, I'm going to interject real quick because one of the main beliefs in voodoo is that the spirit or the soul can leave the body during dreaming or during spirit possession. Okay, go ahead.
yes. Now, the zombification of somebody would actually make the person appear to be dead, but they're actually, their heartbeat is slowed down to like a couple beats per minute. They're actually still alive, but because of the era and the medical world that they had at the time, most of these people were pronounced dead, and then they were buried, and then ultimately their graves were dug up a couple of days later, and then these people were enslaved. Now, um, the biggest case of this is the book ultimately turned into a movie by um, was it Wes Craven that did Serpent and the Rainbow?
I can't remember. I'll find out.
Okay, but they turned the book into a movie, and what it was a Harvard professor had learned about this process and wanted to go down there to study this zombification to find out if it could be an anesthetic for certain, used in surgeries. But when he goes down there, he finds a whole new world. Um, he finds out that there was a man who died 20 years ago that reappeared into their village and claimed to be him, tested to be him, uh, and then they're trying to figure out what the fuck he is. And he's lethargic, he's not himself, but he died. They buried him, and then 20 years later, he's walking back into their village because he had random memories of his sister. Well, turns out what it was he was a victim of zombification, and then when the slave owner that made him work on this plantation, the sugarcane plantation for these 20 years, he died and no longer had control of the totem. So he was free to walk about, but he was not actually ever free again because his soul was not put back.
It was Wes Craven, by the way.
Okay, thanks. But so I have to backtrack. The zombie that we all know, not the voodoo zombie, the zombie that we know was actually created for the movie Night of the Living Dead, which unfortunately here's everybody learned a small little thing. If you change the title after the movie shot, you no longer get credit for the movie. So Night of the Living Dead was public domain the day it was in the cinemas, and George Romero didn't make any money off of that movie, even though he created The Walking Dead as we know it, and he ultimately made no money from his first movie.
That sucks.
Yeah, but going back to the the sinister nature of the voodoo zombie. When people started learning more about this, and then the popularity of the book, and we now have medical science going down. I mean, there's some liberties at the end of the book where they try to make Bill Paxton into a zombie. They take a lot of liberties at the end of the book, but when this starts getting out, people start uh, really equating what the limited knowledge and scope of what we know about voodoo with the voodoo dolls and the harming of people. And now we're getting these stories where they're stealing people's souls and enslaving them forever. The voodoo has become, synonymous with occultism and hate, but it's really not about any of that.
No, it isn't. It's like we said, it was a coping mechanism. It's how the slaves got through their struggle and their suffering was, and it's the same as like, I mean, you have to look at these slaves were put on these boats, crammed into tight little quarters, much like the concentration camps in World War II that, you know, the Jews were all crammed into, living on top of each other, and taken through water. If an illness went through, if one got it, the entire boat got it and everyone died. If the boat sank, there's no escape. You're under deck, and you would be the first to die.
Yeah, and it's not like you're just, oh, you just got to stay down there. There's bars, there's hatches that are locked. You cannot get out.
And on top of that, if you open your mouth at the wrong time, you're getting whipped with, you know, you're getting your back torn apart with a whip.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't like that. It was like, hey, look, I'm a slave. I got it easy. No, they were fucked with.
Right.
So then they had to come up with something to help them cope. Much like, you know, if you look at how Christianity started and how the Romans viewed it, you know, Romans would put Catholics in the arena fighting lions to survive. Yeah. Oh, if you kill the lion, you can live. Oh, if not, we all get to watch lions eat the Catholics.
Right. Right. So part of the, you know, there's a lot of, so we lived through the satanic panic of the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And then as soon as we get into the 90s, people started realizing it's like, that was all bullshit.
Right.
So we kind of needed a new villain at that point. Coming out of the 80s, there was a man named Adolfo Costanzo. Now, he was a practitioner of Palo Mayombe, which is like a witch doctor thing, which isn't voodoo at all, but in a novice eyes, it's conceivably similar. There's a lot of rituals involved, but Costanzo would bless drug mules and drug kingpins in Mexico, and he'd use these spells to, you know, to give protection to these drug cartels. And he became, because whether or not the spells actually worked, or these guys were just getting really fucking lucky, they started feeling invincible. So they started giving Adolfo more and more power. So he needed bigger and bigger spells. So what Costanzo started doing, he started actually sacrificing real humans in his rituals. And this went on for multiple years until he, I'm gotta grab the dude's names. I want to give him
ample credit.
Yeah. Well, I want to give credence to the victim. What's his name? Kilroy. Shit, what was his first name? So in 1988, they took this college student named Mark Kilroy from El Paso, took him across. Oh no, he was from El Paso. He was on the other side of the border in a partying with some friends, and then he was abducted when his friends didn't notice, and then they found him weeks later, you know, along with 15 other mutilated corpses dug up at the ranch of Adolfo Costanzo. Mm-hmm. So now this story gets out there, and it's very sensationalized, but they equated a lot of this to, you know, voodoo practitioners. So this is one more thing with it. You know, you got the Scooby-Doo voodoo dolls. You got the witch doctor practices in you know, like movies like Pirates of the Caribbean, where Calypso brings back somebody from the dead, and there's
voodoo's been used in so many different movies. I mean, if it was not voodoo, I mean, because like we said at the beginning, voodoo is called so many different things by so many different. I
Mhm.
mean, there's voodoo, there's hoodoo, there's Vodoun, voodoo. You know,
Yeah,
just they just change letters and pronunciations, and it's all basically the same,
right.
or some offshoot thereof.
Right. One thing I did find interesting, though, is that about 15% of the population of New Orleans, still practice voodoo.
Yeah,
15%.
that's a lot.
Uh, it's I I don't know what the population is of New Orleans off bat. Especially after before and after Katrina.
Right,
But you know, it's 15,000 per 1,000.
right. I'm gonna find the current population of New Orleans. Can't take me a minute.
Yeah. Well, it's like what we like is I like the idea that uh, they search for higher levels of consciousness, and they believe that ancient spirits can help them achieve this level of Zion, I guess. Which
So the current population as of 2020
hmm
is 390,128.
okay, which is smaller than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I would have to say before Katrina it was probably much bigger.
Yeah,
I'm gonna look because now I'm curious.
but I'm sure that's only with a lot of those are just within city limits.
Yeah, well, before Katrina they were only at 484,674.
Okay,
It's only lost like 100,000 people.
yeah,
That's
that's
interesting.
still 100,000 people, but yeah,
Right, right.
but still that
But
leaves
we talk about major cities like New Orleans. You think of Dallas, you think of Detroit, you think of Chicago, and these places all have over 1 million.
yeah, like Houston, Chicago, yeah,
Yeah,
L.A., San Fran.
they're well over 1 million. But New Orleans,
Hmm,
380,000.
yeah, especially when they have a couple major sports franchises there too.
And not to
But
mention they
still,
also have like yearly holiday that basically celebrates voodoo, and everybody comes to Mardi Gras.
okay, that's a good that's that's a good point because that's a good blending of a a ritual practice and Catholicism because Mardi
Absolutely.
Gras Fat Tuesday takes place the day before Ash Wednesday, which is the official beginning of the Lent season, which is the 40-day period before Easter.
Right.
And that's when you hear all these weirdos saying I can't eat meat on Friday. I have to give up something for Lent. So that's that period right before from Ash Wednesday to Easter.
Yep.
And Fat Tuesday, Mardi Gras, is the day that they're supposed to get all that stuff out of their system.
Yep. So that's the day that if you give a chick a string of beads, she'll show you her boobs.
Yes.
That's the only thing I got out of the whole holiday. I get to see boobs. I'm a guy. I've seen one pair. I have to see them all.
That's right.
But yeah, so I mean, voodoo it's still practiced in Africa. It's still practiced in Haiti. It's still practiced in the U.S. I, however, have not seen or researched enough to find out if it has spread to other countries.
Yeah, I'm sure it has. I'm sure it's rampant all through rampant like it's a plague.
Right.
I'm sure it's prevalent in most of the Caribbean nations, and I'm sure it is through most of the South, the southern Latin American countries, through Central America. So because they all tend to.
But
I'm sure anywhere Catholicism is, voodoo's not far behind.
but I've never really heard of many cases of it in, say, England
Or Poland, or
Poland, where England
Czechoslovakia.
had, they had a lot of black slaves. They're Catholic,
Hmm.
you know, so it's just weird. Yeah, because like it is They now this one says it originated in Haiti, which it didn't. We already know that. But followers can be found in Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, Brazil, and the United States, and elsewhere. Where else? That's what I want to know.
And else, it's saying elsewhere. It's like it's
Right.
just in that one hospital.
Yeah. Well, anyways, I'm sure at some point voodoo had to be in England. It was probably something that they just covered over because it much like Hollywood throughout the 50s through the 2000s whitewashed most stories.
Right.
We'll say that England probably Christian washed most history.
And there was a really bad thing that happened about whitewashing that Hollywood did because they killed John Wayne by doing it.
Yep.
And if you don't believe me, look up the movie Mongol and then look at the tragic events that happened because of it.
Right.
Like 70 people died of cancer, including John Wayne.
Yeah.
He should never been playing Genghis Khan in the first place.
No. No, and I mean, you get back to the whitewash, and you got to think about what Jerry Lewis playing the Asian guy, or Don Rickles playing the Asian guy.
Yeah.
You know, and they did it in a stereotypical fashion. It's odd because this week in my American Illustration, we talked about illustrators at that time, and Dr. Seuss. We all know and love him for Cat in the Hat, but he was also a pro-war guy back in World War II. He did political satire and political cartoons that depicted the Japanese in that, squinty eyes, big teeth, buck teeth image.
Yeah.
And he years later came and apologized for that. And I'm not going to sit there and pass judgment, but we all kind of think of Dr. Seuss as this great guy. Dr. Seuss's wife killed herself because she found out that he was having an affair on her, and then a year later married the woman he was having an affair on his wife for.
Mm.
But I don't know everything that goes into that. I'm not saying take that and just
right.
Let's all judge Dr. Seuss because that's what it should be. But nobody's perfect.
Right. We all make mistakes.
And people that practice Christianity aren't perfect. People that practice voodoo aren't perfect. People that don't practice anything aren't perfect. To err is human.
Yes,
to
if you
forgive,
come with
however,
that's what it spells, right?
Right. To forgive, however, can sometimes just be stupid.
True.
But most times it is to be divine.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yes. So there is so much more we could go into with voodoo, but I think it's something that should be used in a different episode because we've already been rambling on this for well over an hour.
Yes.
I'm sure somebody out there who's just been dying going, I can't get this device to go into the bathroom with me. I wish these guys would shut up so I can go to the bathroom. Well, we're going to shut up so you can go to the bathroom now.
All right. Well, on that note, I'm going to say insert tagline here.
Peace out. Love you guys.